To help us reflect on the legacy of Tanzania's former President Benjamin Mkapa, we're now joined by South Africa's former President Thabo Mbeki. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, Mr. President, and welcome to the program.
Thanks, Peter.
This is a man that you knew for a very long time, and I just wonder, when you heard the news today, what were your first thoughts of him?
Well, Peter, this seems to be days of sadness for us because, as you know, it's not long ago, just in the last few days, we lost the old man Mlangeni, and now we lose another one, Ben Mkapa, because we'd always count Ben Mkapa as one of us, because throughout he was with us for many decades in the struggle against apartheid. He was with us as we tried to build the new democratic South Africa, with us as we interacted with the rest of the continent and the rest of the world. So very, very much one of us. So I did not know that he was not well. So when I was told this morning that he had passed away, it really came as a very big shock. And a very big shock because it's very sad. And we can't even, because of the COVID-19, we would not know, it won't even be possible for us to travel to lay him to rest. Because as I say, we can't separate Ben Mkapa from ourselves and therefore from the freedom of this country. Because he was that close to us for many decades.
Many things have been said about him and his legacy as people have been paying tribute to him. Perhaps let's talk about him as a person first. What do you remember, just Benjamin Mkapa, not the president, not the leader, not the politician, just the man?
Well, Ben was, I always think of him in the context of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. Because even as he told me many times, it's really Julius Nyerere who brought him into the politics of the then Tanganyika and then Tanzania. He was really the great person who brought him up, the icon that Ben Mkapa grew up under. As a consequence of that, one of the things about Ben was that he was very honest, very straightforward, spoke his mind, could always speak with a great deal of passion about issues, but as I say, always very focused about what should happen in Tanzania, about what should be happening on the continent. He would engage me about the challenges on the continent in South Africa. When we were working on Sudan, he got appointed as to facilitate some processes in South Sudan, and would probe me very carefully about the details of what was happening in the Sudan, because that was his character. But very precise, very well organized, very honest, and a very simple person, not complicated. And a genuine friend, very, very sharp mind, very quick-witted, but very humble, really a servant of God.
All right, so you were both presidents for at least 7 years between the two of you. What was he like to work as a president, as a head of state, particularly when one considers both of you were quite passionate about Africa, the continent, at the time that you were both heads of state?
You know, Peter, we at some point we established a bilateral commission with Mozambique. We worked very, very closely when the President Chisano was president of Tanzania then, of Mozambique. We worked very closely about building the bilateral economic relations between Mozambique and South Africa. in a mutually beneficial manner. And Ben Mkapa got to hear about this. And he said to me, but why don't we do the same thing? Because even historically, the relationship between us, particularly the ANC and Tanzania, was very close and it covered many decades. And that therefore, this kind of relationship that we had with Mozambique, surely we needed to have that relationship with Tanzania. And indeed, we set up that commission and that bilateral commission. And so to work in the same way, so that I'm giving that as an example of the kind of cooperation that we had at the government level. You know, when before the war broke out between the TRC under the old man Kabila, when he got the support of Zimbabwe, Angola, Namibia, fighting Uganda and Rwanda. At that point, there were Tanzanian troops in the DRC who had gone there to retrain the Congolese army. But Ben Mkapa did not want them to get involved in a war such as one that broke out. And so he called me and he said, please, can you evacuate those Tanzanian soldiers from there? Because Tanzania didn't have the capacity to move them out quickly. So indeed, the National Defense Force, South African National Defense Force, we asked them to do this and they did it. It was the same thing that happened when there was a ferry that sank in Lake Victoria. And lots of Tanzanians died, they drowned. And again, he called to say, look, here is a major national crisis. Please come and help. So again, the National Defense Force went and they went with their divers, Navy, to fish out all of these corpses. So we did that work. But I'm giving you an indication of the kind of the close bilateral relationship that we had, which also then meant that in all of the work that we're doing on the continent, via the African Union in particular, we would be, and the OAU before that, we were regularly in communication. What are the challenges? What should happen? What positions should we take? So we work very closely because I say we are comrades. This is a relationship that had come out of this long history. You know, as Tanzania got independent in 1961, they immediately contacted the ANC then to say, Nyerere saying that one of the major challenges they are going to face is a public health challenge in Tanganyika. Could the ANC help? So that's how the ANC, early 62, sent out a large group, 30, 40 nurses from here to Tanganyika to go and help. I'm saying that was the kind of relationship which had persisted between the ANC and TANU, the party, Tanganyika African National Union, and later the party CCM, and of course between the ANC and the government of Tanzania later, and then between the government of South Africa and the government. It's a relationship of comradeship. And Ben Mkapa lived up very, very, very well, lived up to that kind of perspective. And so even the personal friendship that we developed, it was really based on the fact that we belonged in the same camp, as it were.
All right, so even after his presidency, many times he's been called in as a mediator, as someone to fall on to help bring calm and peace. Kenya, for example, have declared 3 days of national mourning. Both President Kenyatta and Raila Odinga said that he brought peace to our country. And I just wonder, what was it about his character that people trusted him with such tasks and listened to the solutions that he put on the table?
Well, I think As I say, you see, Ben was a humble person, not overbearing. He knew how to listen. He knew how to take advice. So I'm sure even as the people in Kenya asked him to come during that conflict, 2007, 2008, to say, please come, because they knew that this is not some arrogant person who's going to come and say, I know Kenya, I know your problems, this is the solution. But somebody who would work with them, I'm saying this is a person with a very sharp mind, who would grasp the nature of the problems quite quickly and would work with them to produce a solution, not imposed, but together with them to produce a solution. And they knew that he had that capacity to listen, to facilitate discussion, to produce solutions, really basically deriving from what the belligerents were saying. So he carried that kind of image and that kind of weight, certainly in the region of East Africa.
All right, so we've talked a lot about his international work and his legacy, but he also had a legacy at home. And I suppose as an economist, I can ask you about the work he did there, because he is credited for turning around Tanzania's economy quite a bit when he took office.
Well, part of what had happened there, during the years of Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, they had been driven by an understanding of the critical importance of the state in terms of developing Tanganyika and later Tanzania economically. And one of the results of that was that they built up quite a big state sector in the economy. But in reality, what then happened was that in time, that state sector, these companies that had been developed, which belonged to the government, were non-productive. They were non-profit earning, and therefore had to depend on the budget in order to survive. And it became quite clear that the system wasn't working. So President Mwinyi, from whom Ben Mkapa took over as president of Tanzania, he started the process of saying, look, it is quite clear that as this government, we can't run these things, and started some privatization. And when Ben Mkapa then took over, he actually expedited that process. And so they basically got rid of the state corporations. But at the same time, he introduced some tougher measures in terms of managing public finances, in terms of collection of taxes. And so they did go to the IMF, World Bank for assistance. But World Bank in particular, not IMF, because indeed they didn't need to borrow from the IMF, and therefore have to suffer the consequences of those conditionalities, because they had themselves done everything under Ben Mkapa to manage public finances and so on. And so what happened then was that with that whole process of privatization and attraction of investments from South Africa, from the rest of the world, that's what impacted on the Tanzanian economy. That larger volumes of investment coming into the economy and the absence of the budget subsidies to what had been the state corporations. When that ended, therefore better management of the public finances, as well as these larger investments. And that's what really happened then to produce the positive results as far as the economy was concerned.
All right, and perhaps as we start to wrap things up a little bit, how do you think the continent and here in South Africa we should remember former President Mkapa?
You know, we had an annual, we paid annual visits to Dar es Salaam to attend an annual 2-3 day conference convened by Ben Mkapa under what he called the African Leadership Forum. Because he was very preoccupied with this issue, that a lot of what's gone wrong in our individual African countries and on the continent as a whole is because of the quality of leadership. And therefore you needed to focus on this matter of building up the kind of leadership that we need on the continent so that you are then able to produce the positive results that are required. So I think the rest of the continent needs to go back to that, to listen very carefully to what Ben had to say about this quality of leadership. What kind of leadership do we need? What should inform its conduct? And what should be each perspective be? He insisted, for instance, this comes, of course, very much from Julius Nyerere, on this notion of self-reliance. Very, very keen that we should not look forward to getting aid from somebody. What are we doing? What kind of leadership are we providing? So that as Africans, we can depend on our own resources and so on. So I'm saying, Peter, that I think for the continent properly to remember Ben Mkapa, I think we should continue to focus on this critical matter that he raised, which is the quality of leadership on the continent.
Mr. President, on that, we'll leave it. Thank you very, very much indeed for your time and sharing these powerful memories and thoughts about the late President. Thanks so much indeed for your time, sir.
Thanks, Peter.
That was former President Thabo Mbeki remembering former President Benjamin Mkapa, who died this morning in Tanzania in a hospital there.